All right. So question number one is going to be, you two know each other pretty well. Can you just sort of describe your journey with Mental Game, and each tell me about your journey with the emotional side of the game, the mental game? How did it start? Where are you now? What did you do? Just a general overview. And you could start, Alex, because Chance did a little bit of this in his intro.
Okay, yeah, I mean, for me, it's actually, I feel like I kind of have a pretty interesting mental game journey as far as poker is concerned, because early on when I first started playing, I definitely loved the game when I was kind of playing for fun, like when I was a teenager, but I definitely caught myself making a lot of decisions really regularly that were like against what I thought was the best decision. And it was the type of thing that, like, since I didn't take poker very seriously at the time, I didn't think much of it. But now in hindsight, I can see that they really were clear, identifiable mental game leaks that were happening within my game. I was afraid to be like pushed around. I didn't want to lose a pot. I didn't want to get bluffed. And because of that, I was making a lot of bad plays. As my journey through like self-awareness kind of has unfolded, I've definitely found myself a lot more aware of these subconscious like inclinations that you may have towards a certain action. Maybe some people really are comfortable with bluffing it all off with, three betting and bet shoving, but maybe they don't feel comfortable with hero calling it off for their whole tournament life. So I think that was a really important way that I began to look at mental game, is what's uncomfortable for me from an emotional standpoint, and then try to identify why that may be and kind of move through that. And that's where Elliot Rowe, I think, was insanely valuable to have someone so experienced and knowledgeable in that realm kind of push me along the right path and show me where my kind of emotions that might be from something completely irrational from when I was a child are actually dictating my decisions at the poker table. And obviously that's not anything that anyone wants. So it's really important, I think, to be open-minded and aware of the fact that these things will exist for you, and that identifying them is really important, whether you even are aware of their impact on your game or not.
Yeah, and like identifying something like resilience, for example. Like right now, I've had a bunch of scores lately, so my resilience is quite high. Like taking a bad beat, it's like, I just want a tournament, like I can just shake it off. But like when you have been running bad or like haven't had any good results lately, I think that resilience score, if you will, is just so much lower. And so like when like being aware that like I'm more tiltable now than I am normally, or in my case, like I'm much less tiltable. Just being aware of that is really important as well.
Okay, great. What mindset and shifts do you think players need to make before closing a tournament? Coming into a tournament, what should somebody actually be thinking?
I think this is definitely an interesting one, because I know that everyone plays poker to get to this moment. Everyone, every single person that plays a main event or plays any big field is like, the dream is to get to the final two tables, final table, end game. And that's really what you're there for. That's what you show up to day one. That's what all the grind is for. So there's usually then a heightened level of emotion that comes in when you actually get to that moment. And I think that that's where mindset becomes infinitely more important. And you see so many people make these same regular mistakes of just being generally too conservative and too scared in these moments, because they don't want to take the risk to mess up their big opportunity. And I think the mindset that you need to take is, number one, that if you, with the right framework and the right approach, you will be in this spot numerous times. It will happen again. And I think that having that mindset that these spots will happen again, whether or not that's even true. I mean, if you're deep in the main event, the WSOP main event probably isn't going to happen again that you get there, just as far as statistically. But you still need to come in with the mindset of that you're there regularly, and that will give you a massive edge over your opponents, just with the understanding that this isn't my one shot. This isn't my like one big opportunity. I'm going to play my hands the right way. And sometimes that's going to result in me busting 10th, or sometimes I'm going to get 12th, but I'm going to do everything in my power to make the best decisions to go as far as I can. And if it doesn't work out, the next one will. And just then, if this one doesn't work out, your goal then moves to being, get yourself in that position to do it again. So I think that having that mindset will liberate you deep in the tournament and leave you with a lot more sense of comfort that I think will provide a massive edge if your opponents don't have the same thing.
Yeah, and I also think it's like being aware of how getting to that stage makes you feel. So like when you get down to two tables or the final table in a tournament, like it becomes real, like that sense of excitement, and you become a little bit like boisterous on the inside as well. And so for me, like one of the things that's really important is to like kind of curb that excitement. And I always use the term like, I play my best when I have a quiet mind. And so for me, it's just like calmly thinking about every decision that I have that arises, and not like thinking about, oh, like I'm so close, like I gotta win this tournament, and just staying in the moment and staying present and just focusing as much as you can on each individual decision, and not the excitement of like, oh, like if I win this pot, or like if I bluff this guy, I'll win the tournament. Like getting hung up on certain things like that can cause you to make mistakes in hands and, actually hurt your chances to win the tournament.
Yeah, and these I think present really tough spots as far as the mindset is concerned, because you can't just completely ignore these circumstantial things, like the fact that if you win this 10 big blind pot, that you then become chip leader. That on some strategic level, that stuff is relevant and is important to like be considering in your thought process. So it's not like you can just block it out entirely, but it does need, from an emotional standpoint, as you said, I think it's really important to try to curb these emotional responses that you'll have in these moments.
Yeah, it's only natural to have that excitement arise. So like you will have those emotions you have to deal with.
Okay, great. How do you feel the average player is in terms of self-awareness and emotional control? What about at the highest levels of the game? Is that stuff a factor? So like really answering this question from the perspective of like your average reg to your world-class player, like how good are they in those two domains?
Why don't you attack the world-class regs, since you've been battling a lot more in like the poker go streets and stuff, and then I'll talk about like the average regs.
Yeah, so I think for the world-class regs, it is something that's surprisingly more had more variation than you would expect, I guess, from one player to the other. I do definitely think that as a general rule, of course, the mental control is very high in those fields, and most people have very little emotional impact on their decision making, if any at all. But what you will find, I think, is moods in these games, and I think that this is something that is a lot harder to measure in any larger field where you don't see the people on a regular basis. But it's very hard, even for the most mentally strong, to just bring their exact same game every single day, especially when decisions are oftentimes quite literally at the mercy of a coin flip, whether you're checking or betting or whatever it is. So if your estimation of these percentages is slightly off or slightly skewed towards aggression, it will affect your play. And I think that recognizing, for me, I think something that's been important is recognizing to some extent, like, in these fields, it's going to be a more marginal impact, but on some level, the people that are playing, if they've had a bad month, a bad couple months, or a great month, or a great couple months, kind of like Chance was saying, their willingness to pull the trigger, if they just won the tournament on like a marginal spot, might be a little bit higher. For some players, it might be lower.
Maybe a lot higher.
Yeah, but for most, that would be a lot higher. And I think that, in those types of spots, like keeping as I said, in the high roller field, it's not going to be super relevant as far as like, oh, this guy's raising the cutoff, now all of a sudden it's 50% of 60% of hands or whatever. It's not going to be to that extreme, but recognizing that, maybe there is one pip more in this range, in this bluff range than there normally would be, and kind of adjusting accordingly as far as that. And now I assume when we go into a field where there's a lot more variation in emotional control, this room for adjustment will be even greater.
Yeah, and I'm happy you mentioned mood. I'm going to touch on that for a sec before I go to the tilt control and stuff of the other regs. Like mood is so important. Like you can really tell, like if someone's distracted and like texting their wife, for example, they're not going to be like fighting for pots nearly as much. They might punt off in the one they're in, but like you'll notice, like myself, for example, like you can tell, like if I'm texting and busy on my phone, like you're probably not going to get 3-bet as late. Like I'm not looking for the reasons to 3-bet as late and like stuff like that. But if I'm in the mood where I'm just 100% focused, I probably have all of my bluff combos. And so like, it's, since I always focus in every hand, or even the ones I'm not in, I think it applies a little bit less to me. But you can really, really see the mood of people at the table of like, are they in the mood to fight for pots or not? And like being aware of that will really help you as well. And then what was the phrasing for the question again, Blake?
How do you feel the average player is in terms of self-awareness and emotional control? Is it a factor?
Yeah, like the average reg, I think that their emotional control is a massive factor. Like when I'm playing in these, like, let's just call it 1K to 5K buy-in range, and the average reg is just like a grinding professional who has a lot of leaks, but they're winning in the field. They're a huge victim to their mood. And some of them really like do get tilted and like do different things. And like often they'll just try to do what like the solver says as far as like 3-bet shoves and stuff like that. But I think that in the like mid stakes regulars are considerably more susceptible to emotional control than in the high stakes.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing, but I didn't want to cut into what you were talking about. Is that I feel like those players who play, like you said, that exact buy-in range of like, let's say 500 to 5K live buy-ins, the regular professionals who are doing it for a living. It's very surprising. Well, it's surprising and not surprising, but there's a lot of, it's surprising to me in some ways how unregulated those players' emotions tend to be.
And I think it's surprising
how
to you.
visible it is.
Like one of the things that I'll probably say 15 times during this course is we perceive what we do. So like for you have such good emotional control, I think, that like you don't perceive that others will have bad emotional control. But like, I mean, I'm a victim of my emotions. Everyone is. Like, obviously you and I have much better control over them. And like we did say that you'll never become completely emotionless, but it is surprising, like in the 500 to 5K range, how much the mood really does matter.
What were your best resources for mental game? What coaches did you use, books you read, etc.?
Well, for me, the first kind of thing that opened my eyes to the existence of mental game was Jared Tendler's book, The Mental Game of Poker. This was kind of introduced to me when I was first beginning my poker career, and it definitely opened my eyes to a number of things that I was doing myself, or that I had the tendency to do that, were logically inconsistent, and were really just following, at the mercy of rather my emotions. And I think that even just a book like that, that's, fairly on the simple side, can really help to just reveal to yourself that there are problems here, and have that be something that's front of mind and something that you consider moving forward in your decision-making process. When you look back at your hands and say, oh, why did I decide to, raise here? That's like, in hindsight, I don't know why that is. And then you can kind of analyze those spots and think, okay, did I have any of these things that I've seen in myself going on right now? Like, was the little kid that was bullied being, is that emotion coming out of me in this hand? Is that why a hero called this river? Or is it just because it's the correct play? And I think that's something that when you consider that factor as an element of your decision-making, it can help unlock kind of your mistakes that you might not have even known that you were making.
I got a little hung up on picturing Foxen being bullied. I don't know about the rest of you guys. So I already told my story about my, with Tommy Angelo and stuff like that. But what I didn't say is that I actually had the desire to purchase that package because I had 2 horses at the time who I perceived were incredibly weak in the emotional control area. And so, I think that like most people, whenever they strive to improve at something, it's when times are bad. So I've always been like fairly strong in my mental game, or at least I thought. So I purchased that in hopes to help them. And then I got lucky to realize like, wow, this is like an incredible life-changing like thing. Like not only will I play better poker, I'll be happier in my life. I'll be a better friend, a better, spouse. So I was single at the time, but, and like, it's really crazy how going through the journey of working on your mental fortitude or just working on your mental game will help you in life. And then when I was preparing for the Galfond Challenge, I actually worked with my 2 mindset coaches, Dion and Matt, who I made Optimize Your Mind with. And, it's a constant struggle, not necessarily a struggle now, but like, it's just a constant, game of something I need to work on. Like recently I did like a sound bath and I couldn't actually sit there and be mindful. And I realized that it was because I'd let that muscle get so weak that I was like, oh, like I really need to get back to training this muscle and start meditating again and just like be as present as possible. And so it's like, something that you have these little reminders regularly of, oh, I do need to work on this again, or I'm not as good at this as I thought.
But Alex, if you were to give one piece of feedback / guidance to yourself when you started your career, what would it be?
I think one of the first things that I would say to myself is to focus on like friends and community. I think that's something that has a huge impact on your progression. I've seen so many people that are maybe not the highest raw talent level, but they get plugged into the right group and they have success. And you know, I think if you find yourself in a really good group of smart people who are working hard and just have the open-mindedness that to just get better and do everything that they can to improve their results, it sets you up in a position where success just becomes infinitely more likely. This game's really tough. As we discussed, the emotional side of the game can be really hard, and it's not something easy to get through on your own. And having people who you know are going through the exact same thing and you know can relate and you know are there to talk through the moments that are tough, whether it just be fundamentally through a hand or psychologically through a difficult spot like a final table or something like that. I think having that community around you is extremely important. But it kind of I think that highlights the underlying goal that I would say within that is to always try to improve yourself. And I think that's really the number one thing is a lack of complacency. I think like something that Chance had just mentioned with respects to mental game is something that's really common. He, prior to seeking Tommy Angelo for his horses, didn't think that mental game was something that he needed to work on. And I think that's something that's the case for most people. They would tell you that, oh no, my mental game's strong. But it's almost never true. Like if you're not someone who's actually put the time in to work on that, or like meditated or done mindset work in one capacity or another, in my opinion, it's extremely unlikely that you'll actually be like mentally sound for poker. So I think that it's one of those things that as long as you're constantly focused on self-improvement, you're going to move in the right direction. And I think that mindset and mentality is a really good place to start, and as well as community for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you absolutely nailed it. So I'll just say one thing that probably won't even apply to most people, but don't play stoned. You don't play better stoned. It just makes it easy to sit there lazily and like have the time pass when you're not playing hands. Like that would actually, like, I think that's, not going to apply to a lot of people, but the people it applies to, it really will make a difference.
What do you think are the biggest mental mistakes made by recreational players?
I think that a couple that I mentioned earlier, but I guess I'll get more specific on them. It's definitely, like we discussed, the end game of poker. I think that it's what everyone's working for. It's easy to bluff day one. It's easy to hero call for your tournament on day one. It gets increasingly harder and harder to do these things from an emotional standpoint. Every level that you progress throughout the tournament, I think anyone who denied this is lying to themselves. It gets harder and harder to pull the trigger on a big decision later in the tournament. And I think that emotions are just so much more prone to influence your decision-making in that spot. So I think that deep in these tournaments, most recreational players are overcome by their emotion, and they're no longer thinking logically. They're no longer using the small semblance of like poker logic that they may have. And when you don't have a solid framework as far as your mechanics are considered, it makes these emotional leaks that much more apparent within your game. If the top high roller in the world is absolutely steamed out of his mind, he's still going to be able to remember precisely what the cutoff opening range is. 30 big blinds effective with a 15 big blind and stacking a small blind, and the chip leader in the big blind, 12 off the money. They're going to remember these spots regardless, because they've been studied so much, so that their emotions can only affect their decision making so much. But I think that when you don't have such a solid framework that's consistent and repeatable, it makes your emotions so much more apt to completely control your gameplay. And when you don't have such a solid foundation to come back to, your emotions allow you to stray even farther fundamentally.
See, and you're saying how much it affects them when they get there. I actually think that it stops them from getting there. So like, I think you were the one who actually gave me this terminology where the wheels start to come off. Like this guy has like 60 big blinds. He's just like has all the chips at the table, and like someone jams ace jack for 10 big blinds. He calls it ace king. The guy hits a jack, and you can just see the wheels start to come off, and like starts to make a little mistake, and then it gets more tilted, and like it just gets worse and worse and worse. And like the spiral of like, dude, you still have 50 big blinds. Average stack is 20, and like the wheels just come right off. And like I think that just the overarching emotional control prevents a lot of recreational players from getting to those late stages. And like, yeah, you're absolutely right. When they get there, they're not jamming the cutoff with 9-10 suited with 9 big blinds like they probably should, because of that fear. And then they don't have the fundamentals like you mentioned. But like, I actually think that like the tilt control prevents them from getting there.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's in a really similar way. I completely agree with you, but I think it's in a similar way in that like, their range just completely changes. Their flop c-bet frequency completely changes. Everything that they do goes from, close to the correct numbers maybe to just way off into whatever side of the scale their emotions decide to take them. Maybe it's fear and they tighten up, or maybe it's like frustration and they just go wild. But yeah, that's definitely the derivation of all of these problems, I think, or the main problems for these players is emotional.